The flashing blue and white strobe lights in the rearview mirror usually signal a minor inconvenience or a simple speeding ticket. But on a muggy summer night on Route 35, they signaled the dramatic collapse of a career built on unchecked prejudice and abuse of power. Officer Dave Harlan thought he had hooked another easy target. A black man driving a brand-new jet-black Porsche Cayenne through a wealthy, heavily patrolled suburban corridor outside Riverton. Harlan anticipated fear. He expected submission. He was ready to assert his dominance. What the veteran patrolman didn't know, as he aggressively approached the driver's side window with his hand resting heavily on his holster, was that the man behind the wheel wasn't a random civilian to be bullied. He was the incoming chief of police. Inside the sleek Porsche Cayenne, the new chief navigated the winding, tree-lined stretch of Route 35 with the quiet confidence of a man who had spent his entire life mastering high-pressure situations. He possessed a formidable presence, broad-shouldered, sharp-eyed, with a dusting of gray at his temples that hinted at decades of hard-won wisdom. He was dressed casually in a plain, dark Henley and tailored jeans, enjoying the quiet hum of the German engine. He was officially off the clock, though in his line of work, the clock never truly stopped ticking. He was scheduled to stand before the mayor of Riverton, Kyle Hayes, and take the oath of office as the city's new chief of police. He had been headhunted from a major metropolitan department 3 states over, specifically brought in to clean up a police force that had become notorious for corruption, excessive force complaints, and deeply ingrained racial profiling. That night, however, he just wanted to find his temporary corporate apartment, unpack his bags, and get a good night's sleep. He had the cruise control set exactly to the speed limit. He used his turn signals. He maintained his lane perfectly. He was giving the local patrol units absolutely no reason to look twice at him. But in Riverton, some officers didn't need a reason. Sitting in his marked cruiser, tucked away in the shadows of an abandoned strip mall, Officer Dave Harlan was having a slow night. Harlan was a veteran of the force, a man whose thick neck and permanent scowl were as much a part of his uniform as his badge. He was a relic of the old guard, a faction within the Riverton Police Department that viewed the city streets as their personal kingdom and the citizens as subjects to be managed through intimidation. He hated the direction the country was going. He hated the rumors of a new progressive chief coming to town to shake things up. Most of all, he hated being bored. As the sleek black Porsche glided past the strip mall, the streetlights briefly illuminated the driver. Harlan's eyes narrowed. He saw the expensive vehicle. He saw the out-of-state temporary dealer plates. And he saw the color of the driver's skin. Well, 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 Harlan muttered to himself, the leather of his duty belt creaking as he shifted in his seat. What do we have here? Harlan didn't run the plates. He didn't observe a traffic violation. He simply dropped his cruiser into drive, pulled out of the parking lot, and accelerated until he was riding inches from the Porsche's rear bumper. Inside the Cayenne, the chief immediately noticed the aggressive tailgating. He glanced in his rearview mirror, identifying the distinct silhouette of a Crown Victoria Interceptor. A seasoned law enforcement officer himself, he knew exactly what was happening. It was a classic intimidation tactic. The officer was running the plate, checking for warrants, and trying to rattle the driver into making a mistake. A sudden swerve, a tap of the brakes, anything that could be construed as suspicious behavior to justify a stop. He didn't flinch. He maintained his speed. He kept his hands at 10 and 2. He let out a slow, measured breath. Let's see what kind of department I'm inheriting, he thought. For 2 miles, Harlan rode the Porsche's bumper. When the chief refused to take the bait, Harlan's frustration boiled over. He slapped the button on his console. The light bar erupted in a blinding display of blue and white strobes. The piercing wail of the siren shattered the quiet suburban night. The chief calmly activated his right turn signal, smoothly guided the heavy SUV onto the gravel shoulder, and brought it to a complete stop beneath a flickering amber street lamp. He placed the vehicle in park, turned off the engine, and rolled down all four windows, a standard safety protocol he had taught rookies for years. He placed both hands firmly on the steering wheel, remaining perfectly still. Behind him, Harlan parked his cruiser at an aggressive offset angle, intentionally blinding the driver's side mirror with his high beams and spotlights. It was a tactical approach designed to disorient and intimidate. Harlan keyed his shoulder mic. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4 Bravo. I'm conducting a 1011 on Route 35, half a mile south of the county line. Black Porsche SUV, out-of-state temp tags. Copy 4. Bravo." The voice of dispatcher Emily Collins crackled back. "Reason for the stop?" Harlan smirked. "Failure to maintain lane. Driver looks nervous." It was a blatant lie, and the chief, sitting in the dark cabin of his car, knew it. The real test of the Riverton Police Department had just begun. Heavy footsteps crunched against the gravel as Officer Harlan approached the Porsche. He didn't walk with the cautious, professional stride of an officer conducting a routine traffic stop. He swaggered, his right hand rested casually but prominently on the grip of his service weapon. He stopped just behind the B-pillar of the vehicle, intentionally staying out of the chief's direct line of sight, forcing him to turn his head awkwardly to see him. "Evening," Harlan said, his voice dripping with forced authority and a heavy layer of condescension. He shined his heavy metal maglite directly into the chief's eyes, pinning the older man in the harsh beam. The chief squinted, turning his face slightly away from the blinding light. "Good evening, officer," he replied, his tone calm, steady, and entirely devoid of the fear Harlan was seeking. "Is there a problem?" "License, registration, and proof of insurance?" Harlan barked, ignoring the question. He swept the beam of his flashlight over the pristine leather interior of the Porsche, lingering on the expensive dashboard displays and the designer duffel bag resting on the passenger seat. "Whose car is this, buddy?" The chief's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "Buddy?" It was a subtle microaggression, a deliberate attempt to establish superiority and strip away respect. "The vehicle belongs to me, officer," the chief said smoothly. He slowly moved his right hand toward his chest. "My wallet is in my inner jacket pocket. I'm going to reach for it now." "Move slow," Harlan ordered, his hand tightening on his holster. "No sudden movements." The chief extracted his wallet with deliberate, exaggerated slowness. He pulled out his driver's license and out-of-state ID from his previous residence and handed it through the window along with the crisp, new registration paperwork for the Porsche. He intentionally did not hand over his police badge or his new city ID. He wanted to experience this exactly as a civilian would. Harlan snatched the documents out of the chief's hand. He held them up to the light, squinting at the name. "Leon Harper." "Long way from home, aren't you, Leon?" Harlan asked, intentionally using the first name to maintain his position of dominance. "Gee, what brings you to Riverton?" "I'm relocating for work," the chief answered truthfully, keeping his eyes fixed straight ahead. "Officer, you haven't informed me why I was pulled over." Harlan leaned closer to the window, invading the chief's personal space. The scent of stale coffee and cheap chewing tobacco wafted into the car. "I'll ask the questions here. You were swerving all over the road back there. You been drinking tonight, Leon?" "I haven't had a drop of alcohol," the chief replied, his voice a low, steady rumble. "And with all due respect, I had my cruise control set to the speed limit, and I maintained my lane perfectly." I believe your dashcam will verify that. Harlan's eyes flashed with anger. He hated civilians who knew about dashcams. He hated people who talked back. And he especially hated black men in expensive cars who didn't shrink in his presence. Step out of the vehicle, Harlan commanded, taking a step back and unhooking the retention strap on his holster. The chief didn't move immediately. Officer, I am legally obligated to provide my identification, which I have done. I am not legally obligated to exit my vehicle for a minor traffic infraction, unless you can articulate reasonable suspicion that a crime has been committed, or for officer safety. Are you ordering me out of the car, or asking? The audacity of the response made Harlan's face flush a deep, angry crimson. I am giving you a lawful order to step out of the goddamn vehicle right now. You are acting erratic and uncooperative. Get out before I drag you out. The chief took a deep breath. He knew the law perfectly. Pennsylvania versus Mims gave the officer the right to order a driver out of the vehicle during a lawful traffic stop. But the initial stop itself was entirely unlawful. However, fighting it on the side of a dark road with an armed, aggressive, and clearly prejudiced officer was a recipe for disaster. A disaster he had seen end in tragedy too many times in his career. I am complying with your order, officer, the chief said loudly and clearly, ensuring his voice would be picked up by the cruiser's microphone, if it was even turned on. He slowly opened the door and stepped out into the humid night air. At well over 6 feet, he was a few inches taller than Harlan and significantly broader in the shoulders. As he stood up to his full height, Harlan instinctively took half a step back, his hand firmly gripping the butt of his gun. Turn around. Face the car. Hands on the roof, Harlan ordered, his voice betraying a hint of nervous adrenaline. The chief complied, placing his palms flat against the cool roof of the Porsche. He spread his legs slightly. Harlan approached from behind and aggressively kicked the chief's boots further apart. He then proceeded to conduct a pat-down search. It wasn't a standard professional Terry frisk for weapons. It was rough, intrusive, and deliberately demeaning. Harlan dug his hands deep into the chief's pockets, feeling along his waistline, his hands lingering unnecessarily. You got anything on you that's going to poke me, prick me, or bleed on me? Harlan sneered near the chief's ear. I am unarmed. I have no contraband, the chief stated flatly. Harlan finished the invasive search, stepping back. Wait right here. Do not move a muscle. Harlan walked back to his cruiser with the chief's documents. The chief remained facing his car, his hands resting on the roof. The gravel crunched beneath his boots as he shifted his weight. He was mentally logging every single violation of department protocol, every civil rights infraction, every breach of basic human decency. Officer Harlan was building a spectacular case against himself, and he had no idea that the man he was illegally detaining was the one who held the power to fire him. Inside the cruiser, Officer Harlan was furiously typing on his mobile data terminal. He ran the chief's license. Clean. No warrants, no prior arrests. Perfectly valid. He ran the vehicle's temporary tags. Valid. Registered to Leon Harper. Harlan slammed his hand against the steering wheel. He had nothing. The stop was entirely baseless, and now he was stuck. If he just wrote a warning for a fabricated lane violation and let the guy go, he would look weak. His ego simply couldn't allow it. In his mind, people like the chief didn't drive cars like this without dirty money. There had to be something in that car. Drugs, a weapon, cash, something. He keyed his radio again. Dispatch, 4 Bravo. Start me another unit to my location. Copy, 4 Bravo. Unit 2 Charlie. Officer Chris Lopez is en route. He is on the way. Emily Collins replied. Harlan stepped back out of the cruiser and walked back to the Porsche. The chief was still standing exactly where he had been told, a stoic statue in the flashing emergency lights. "All right, Leon," Harlan said, tapping his flashlight against his thigh. "Your license is clear, but given your erratic driving and your generally uncooperative attitude, I have reason to believe there might be illegal narcotics or weapons in this vehicle. I'm going to need to search the car." The chief turned his head slightly to look at the officer. "Officer, you do not have my consent to search my vehicle. I have committed no crime. You have no probable cause." Harlan barked a harsh laugh. "I don't need your permission, buddy. I smell marijuana coming from the cabin of the vehicle. That gives me probable cause." It was the oldest, dirtiest trick in the book of corrupt policing. The phantom smell of marijuana impossible to prove or disprove on a dashcam video, but historically accepted by complacent judges as an excuse to tear a citizen's car apart. The chief's eyes hardened into cold, dark obsidian. "Officer Harlan," the chief said, reading the man's nameplate for the first time. "I assure you there is no marijuana in that vehicle. I do not smoke. The car is brand new. If you proceed with this search, you are doing so illegally, in direct violation of my Fourth Amendment rights." Harlan stepped directly into the chief's face, his finger jabbing into the air just inches from the chief's chest. "You listen to me, boy. You might think you're pretty smart with your big words and your fancy car, but out here on this highway, I am the law. You do not tell me how to do my job. You stand right there. Keep your mouth shut, and keep your hands where I can see them." The use of the word boy hung in the humid air like toxic smoke. It was a racial slur wrapped in a seemingly innocuous noun, a verbal whip meant to demean and subjugate. The chief felt a familiar cold fury ignite in his chest, but he locked it down instantly. He would not give Harlan the satisfaction of an emotional reaction. He would defeat him with the system. A second set of headlights approached from the south, pulling up behind Harlan's cruiser. A younger officer stepped out. Officer Chris Lopez was relatively new to the Riverton force. He looked nervous as he approached the scene, his eyes darting between the expensive Porsche, the imposing figure of the chief, and the aggressive posture of his senior officer. "Everything good, Brad?" Lopez asked, stopping a few feet away. "Yeah, Lopez. Got a hostile suspect here. Claims he knows his rights." Harlan mocked. "I got probable cause to search the vehicle. Keep an eye on him. If he twitches, drop him." Lopez swallowed hard, looking at the chief. The chief looked back at the young officer, his expression unreadable. Lopez didn't see a hostile suspect. He saw a sharply dressed, calm, older man who was complying perfectly. What's the probable cause, Brad?" Lopez asked hesitantly. Harlan glared at the rookie. "Odor of marijuana, Lopez. Can't you smell it?" Lopez sniffed the air. He smelled exhaust fumes, pine needles, and Harlan's cheap cologne. He didn't smell marijuana, but he knew better than to contradict a senior officer, especially not one as vindictive as Harlan. Lopez nodded slowly, looking down at his boots. "Right. Yeah, I smell it." The chief noted the exchange. The veteran is corrupt, and the rookie is too scared to stop him. A systemic failure, the chief mentally logged. Harlan opened the driver's side door of the Porsche and began to tear it apart. He wasn't conducting a methodical search. He was vandalizing the vehicle. He ripped open the center console, tossing pristine registration papers, charging cables, and mints onto the floorboards. He tore the custom floor mats out and threw them onto the wet grass on the side of the road. He aggressively yanked down the sun visors. Moving to the passenger side, Harlan grabbed the expensive leather duffel bag. He unzipped it roughly and turned it upside down, dumping the contents directly onto the leather passenger seat. Expensive dress shirts, a shaving kit, tailored slacks, and a small, heavy mahogany box tumbled out. Harlan's eyes lit up when he saw the wooden box. "What do we have here?" he muttered greedily. He grabbed the box, expecting to find a stash of drugs, wads of cash, or a hidden weapon. He flipped the brass latch and opened the lid. Inside the velvet-lined box wasn't a brick of cocaine or a loaded Glock. It was a gleaming gold shield. Harlan froze. He stared at the object. He blinked, the streetlights reflecting off the polished metal. His brain struggled to process what his eyes were seeing. Engraved deeply into the heavy gold shield, surrounding the state seal, were the words, "Chief of Police, Riverton Police Department." Beneath the title, etched in black enamel, was the name Leon Harper. The humid night air suddenly felt freezing cold to Officer Dave Harlan. The blood drained completely from his face, leaving him pale and sweating. The heavy, confident swagger evaporated instantly, replaced by a sinking, nauseating realization of catastrophic magnitude. He wasn't searching the car of a local drug dealer. He hadn't just racially profiled, illegally detained, and verbally abused an innocent civilian. He had just done it to the absolute highest-ranking law enforcement officer in the city. The man who signed his paychecks. The man who had the power to strip him of his badge, his pension, and his freedom. Harlan's hands began to tremble so violently that the mahogany box nearly slipped from his grip. He slowly turned his head, looking through the windows of the ravaged Porsche out to the side of the road. Leon Harper was still standing exactly where he had been ordered. His hands were resting calmly on the roof of the car. He wasn't angry. He wasn't gloating. He was simply watching Officer Harlan with the cold, calculating eyes of an apex predator who had just let the prey walk directly into the trap. The silence that descended upon the side of Route 35 was absolute, save for the rhythmic metallic click, click, click of the cruiser's light bar relay and the low hum of the idling interceptor. Inside the ravaged cabin of the Porsche, Officer Dave Harlan stood frozen. The heavy mahogany box felt like a block of solid lead in his trembling hands. He stared at the gold shield, the words Chief of Police burning themselves into his retinas. His mind, usually quick to formulate a lie or a thinly veiled threat, completely short-circuited. The arrogance that had fueled him for years evaporated, replaced by a cold, suffocating terror. He looked from the badge to the man standing by the roof of the car, then back to the badge. "Brad!" The voice of Officer Chris Lopez broke the spell. The rookie was standing a few feet away, squinting into the glare of the spotlights. "Jim, Brad, you find something? You need evidence bags?" Harlan didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat had seized up, dry as ash. Slowly, agonizingly, his hand shaking so violently he nearly dropped it. Harlan closed the brass latch of the velvet-lined box. He carefully, almost reverently, placed it back onto the leather passenger seat amid the chaotic mess of clothing and registration papers he had callously dumped there moments before. He backed out of the Porsche as if it were rigged with explosives. When he turned to face Leon Harper, the veteran cop looked physically diminished. The aggressive swagger was gone. His shoulders were slumped, his face the color of spoiled milk. Leon slowly lowered from the roof of the car. He turned to face Harlan fully, brushing a speck of dust from his dark Henley. The dynamic of the scene shifted instantly, an invisible but palpable transfer of absolute authority. Leon was no longer the prey. He was the apex predator, and he hadn't even raised his voice. "Did you find the marijuana, Officer Harlan?" Leon asked. His voice was no longer the carefully neutral tone of a compliant civilian. It carried the resonant, commanding tone of a man accustomed to leading thousands of officers. Harlan swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. No, sir. I did not, sir." The word slipped out involuntarily. Minutes ago, it had been buddy and boy. Leon took a slow, deliberate step forward. Harlan instinctively took a step back, his hand nowhere near his holster now. "You didn't find any marijuana because there isn't any, and there never was," Leon stated, his dark eyes locked onto Harlan's panicked gaze. "You didn't observe a lane violation because my cruise control was set, and my driving was flawless. You initiated a pretextual stop based entirely on the make of my vehicle and the color of my skin. You then fabricated probable cause to conduct an illegal search, violating my Fourth Amendment rights, and verbally assaulted me in the process." "Listen, man. Harlan stammered, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "It was dark. I thought I made a mistake." "A mistake?" Leon's voice dropped an octave, cutting through the humid night air like a scalpel. "A mistake is misreading a license plate. What you just did was a calculated, predatory abuse of power under color of law, and you did it because you believed I was someone who had no voice, no power, and no recourse to fight back." Lopez, sensing the drastic shift in tone, stepped forward, his hand nervously resting on his duty belt. "Hey, step back, sir. Let's all just calm down." "Officer Lopez," Leon snapped, his gaze snapping to the young rookie. The sheer force of the command froze Lopez in his tracks. "Keep your hands away from your body belt and activate your body-worn camera immediately. If it's already on, ensure the audio is recording. Do it now." Lopez blinked, confused but entirely overwhelmed by the commanding presence of the man in front of him. Instinct and training kicked in. He reached up and double-tapped the center of his Axon body camera. A short beep confirmed it was recording. "Good," Leon said. He walked past Harlan, who stood paralyzed by the open door of the Porsche. Leon reached into the cabin, picked up the mahogany box, and turned back to the two officers. He flipped the lid open and held it up so the gleaming gold shield caught the harsh glare of the cruiser's headlights. "For the benefit of your body camera, Officer Lopez, and the dash cam in Unit 4, Bravo." Leon spoke clearly and deliberately. "My name is Leon Harper. I will be sworn in by Mayor Hayes as the new chief of police for Riverton." Lopez's jaw literally dropped. The color drained from his face as his eyes darted from the gold shield to Leon's unyielding expression, and finally to Harlan, who looked like a man standing on the gallows waiting for the trap door to open. Chief, Lopez stuttered, instinctively snapping to a rigid posture of attention. "I had no idea." "I know you didn't, Lopez," Leon said, his tone softening slightly for the rookie, though his eyes remained hard. "But you stood there and corroborated a phantom smell of marijuana to facilitate an illegal search, because you were too intimidated by your senior officer to do what was right. We will have a long conversation about your future in my department later, but right now we are dealing with him." Leon turned his full, crushing attention back to Harlan. The longtime veteran was hyperventilating, sweat pouring down his forehead, stinging his eyes. "Chief Harper," Harlan pleaded, his voice cracking, entirely stripped of his false bravado. "Please, I've got years on the job. I've got a pension. I've got a family. I didn't know it was you. If you had known, you would have saluted me and sent me on my way." Leon interrupted, his voice laced with absolute disgust. "That is precisely the point. Harlan, you only regret this because of who I am. You don't regret the action. You regret the target. How many young men in this city have you done this to? How many lives have you derailed with fabricated charges and illegal searches just because they didn't have a gold shield in their glove box? Harlan had no answer. He looked down at the gravel, his chest heaving. "Officer Lopez," Leon barked. "Yes, Chief," Lopez responded instantly. "Get on your radio. I want the shift supervisor out here immediately. Code 3. Tell them to bring a camera, and neither of you move a single muscle until they arrive." A short time later, the wail of a third siren pierced the night. A Ford Explorer police interceptor, marked with the chevrons of a supervisor, tore down Route 35 and skidded to a halt on the gravel shoulder, boxing in Harlan's cruiser. Sergeant Matt Miller stepped out of the vehicle. Miller was a sharp, by-the-book supervisor in his late 30s, known for running a tight shift and having zero tolerance for the cowboy antics of the older generation of cops. He adjusted his duty belt and strode briskly toward the cluster of vehicles, his flashlight cutting through the dark. He saw Lopez standing rigidly at attention near his cruiser. He saw Harlan leaning heavily against the trunk of the Crown Vic, looking physically ill. And he saw a tall, sharply dressed black man standing calmly beside a thoroughly ransacked Porsche Cayenne. "What is the situation here?" Miller demanded, looking directly at Harlan. "Dispatch said you requested a supervisor." "Code 3, Lopez. Who's bleeding?" Harlan couldn't speak. He just shook his head, looking at the ground. Miller frowned, his hand instinctively resting on his radio mic. He turned his flashlight toward the civilian. "Sir, I'm Sergeant Miller. Can you tell me what's going on?" Leon stepped forward, directly into the beam of the flashlight. He didn't shield his eyes. He held out the mahogany box, the lid open. "Good evening, Sergeant Miller," Leon said calmly. "I am Leon Harper." Miller's flashlight beam hit the gold shield. The sergeant froze. Unlike Harlan, Miller kept up with city politics and departmental memos. He knew exactly who Leon Harper was. He knew the incoming chief was a highly decorated former precinct commander from a major metropolitan gang task force. Miller instantly killed his flashlight, clipped it to his belt, and snapped off a crisp, textbook salute. "Chief Harper." "Welcome to Riverton, sir. I apologize, I was unaware you had arrived in the city." "Put your hand down, Sergeant," Leon said, returning the salute with a brief nod. "I arrived a short while ago. Unfortunately, my welcome to Riverton was handled by Officer Harlan." Miller looked past the chief at the Porsche. He saw the designer clothing strewn across the leather seats, the custom floor mats tossed carelessly into the muddy grass. The center console ripped open. His face hardened as the reality of the scene clicked into place. He looked at Harlan, and his expression filled with pure, unadulterated fury. "Harlan?" Miller growled, taking a threatening step toward the older officer. "What the hell did you do?" Leon's voice cracked like a whip, halting Miller in his tracks. "I will handle this. You are here to document the scene." Leon walked slowly toward Harlan. The veteran cop pushed himself off the trunk of his cruiser, looking like a cornered animal. "Officer Harlan," Leon said, his voice carrying clearly over the hum of the 3 police vehicles. "Under departmental policy, and under my authority as the incoming chief of police, you are hereby stripped of your police powers, effective immediately." Harlan gasped as if he had been punched in the stomach. "Chief, please." Silence. Leon roared, the sheer volume and authority of the command echoing off the trees. The sudden burst of anger was terrifying, a glimpse of the formidable force that had dismantled organized crime rings in his previous city. "You do not get to speak. You do not get to explain. You do not get to negotiate." Leon turned to the supervisor. Sergeant Miller, relieve Officer Harlan of his duty weapon, his backup weapon, his taser, and his badge. Secure them in the trunk of your vehicle. Miller didn't hesitate. Yes, Chief. He walked over to Harlan. Hands away from your belt, Brad. Do it now. Humiliation washed over Harlan in waves as he stood on the side of the highway, the flashing lights illuminating his disgrace. With shaking hands, he unbuckled his heavy leather duty belt, handing it over to his supervisor. He reached into his shirt pocket and unpinned his silver Riverton PD badge. The metal suddenly feeling cold and foreign, he handed it to Miller. Now, Leon said, looking at the disarmed, badgeless man, you are going to walk over to my vehicle. You're going to pick up every single item you threw into the dirt. You will wipe down the floor mats. You will carefully fold my clothing, and you will place everything back exactly where you found it. And you will do it while Officer Lopez records every second of it on his body camera. Harlan looked at the muddy grass, then at the pristine Porsche, and finally at Lopez, the rookie who was now watching his former mentor's absolute destruction. The power dynamic had completely inverted. The predator had been entirely defanged, neutered, and humiliated in front of his peers. Chief, Harlan whispered, a single tear of sheer terror and humiliation leaking from his eye. I have a bad back. The mud. I do not care about your back, Mr. Harlan, Leon said coldly, intentionally stripping him of his title. You had no problem bending over to tear my property apart. You will fix it. Now the only sounds on Route 35 were the idling engines and the pathetic, ragged breathing of Dave Harlan as he crawled on his hands and knees in the damp grass. He retrieved mints, charging cables and paperwork, wiping them off on his uniform pants before carefully placing them back into the Porsche. He picked up the expensive floor mats, desperately trying to wipe the mud off with his bare hands. Leon stood by, watching with cold, impassive eyes. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He simply ensured that the consequences of unchecked arrogance were felt deeply and completely. When Harlan finally finished, his uniform was stained with mud and sweat, his hands shaking, his spirit entirely broken. He stood awkwardly by the side of the car, waiting for his next order. Leon walked over to the driver's side of the Porsche and slid into the luxurious leather seat. He started the engine, the powerful German V8 roaring to life. He rolled down the window and looked at Sergeant Miller. Sergeant, transport Mr. Harlan to the precinct. Place him in an interview room and contact Internal Affairs. Have them wake up the lead investigator if they have to. I want a full recorded statement from him and from Officer Lopez before dawn. Impound his cruiser. He is suspended without pay pending termination. Understood, Chief? Miller replied firmly. Leon looked at Harlan one last time. The man looked incredibly small, a relic of a bygone era of policing that Leon was brought in to eradicate. I'll see you at my swearing-in ceremony, Mr. Harlan, Leon said softly, though the words carried the weight of a gavel slamming down in a courtroom. Oh, wait, no, I won't. Leon rolled up the window, put the Porsche into drive, and pulled smoothly back onto Route 35. He left Dave Harlan standing in the dirt, stripped of his gun, his badge, and his power, illuminated only by the flashing lights of the career he had just destroyed. The morning sun over Riverton did nothing to burn off the suffocating tension that had settled over the municipal police headquarters. Word of the midnight incident on Route 35 had spread through the ranks like a crown fire through dry timber. Cops are natural investigators, and by morning, every patrolman, detective, and desk sergeant knew the catastrophic details. Dave Harlan, the untouchable, loudmouthed veteran of the graveyard shift, had pulled over a black man in a Porsche Cayenne, illegally searched his car, verbally abused him, and discovered a gold shield bearing the title of Chief of Police. On the fourth floor of City Hall, a very different atmosphere reigned. The grand, mahogany-paneled chambers were packed with local dignitaries, press, and the nervous upper brass of the Riverton Police Department. Mayor Kyle Hayes, a pragmatic politician with a low tolerance for scandal, stood at the podium. He had received a very early, very disturbing phone call from Sergeant Matt Miller detailing the night's events. Hayes knew his decision to hire an outsider was going to ruffle feathers, but he hadn't expected a high-profile civil rights violation hours before the swearing-in ceremony. As the ceremony got underway, the heavy oak doors opened. Leon Harper walked in, wearing his immaculate midnight blue dress uniform. 4 gleaming gold stars rested perfectly on his collar. The crisp creases of his trousers, the spit-shined leather of his Oxfords, and his stoic, unreadable expression projected an aura of absolute, unyielding authority. As he strode down the center aisle, the room fell dead silent. The senior officers in the front row, men who had tacitly allowed cops like Harlan to operate unchecked for decades, suddenly found the intricate patterns of the carpet utterly fascinating. Leon raised his right hand and placed his left on a worn Bible held by Councilwoman Linda Carter. I, Leon Harper, do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States, Leon began, his resonant baritone filling the cavernous room without the need for a microphone. As he spoke the words, he locked eyes with Captain Sam Foster, the man who had been the acting chief, and who had personally signed off on Harlan's glowing performance evaluations year after year. Foster swallowed hard and looked away. And that I will faithfully discharge the duties of the office of Chief of Police for Riverton without prejudice, favor, or fear. So help me God. Congratulations, Chief Harper, Mayor Hayes said, shaking his hand firmly. The floor is yours. Leon stepped to the podium. He didn't carry notes. He looked out at the flashing cameras of the local press, the nervous politicians, and the terrified police commanders. Good morning, Leon said softly. Yet the words carried the weight of a thunderclap. When I accepted this position, I promised Mayor Hayes and the citizens of Riverton that I would bring transparency, accountability, and justice to a department that has, frankly, lost its way. I intended to begin that work this morning. However, the work found me last night. A collective nervous intake of breath swept through the uniformed officers in the room. Last night, I was the victim of a pretextual traffic stop, an illegal detention, and an unconstitutional search executed by a veteran of this very department. Leon continued, his voice devoid of emotion, operating entirely on cold, hard facts. That officer assumed I was a civilian without a voice. He assumed his badge was a shield for his prejudice, rather than a symbol of public trust. He was wrong. Leon leaned forward slightly, resting his large hands on the edges of the podium. Let me be entirely clear to every officer wearing the Riverton patch. The era of the good old boy network is dead. The era of covering for bad badges is over. Effective immediately, any officer who violates the constitutional rights of a citizen will not be retrained. They will not be suspended with pay. They will be unceremoniously fired, and I will personally march the evidence to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. We work for the people, and God help any officer who forgets that. Thank you. He stepped away from the podium, leaving the room in a stunned, ringing silence. The press erupted into shouted questions, but Leon ignored them, striding straight toward the exit. He had an appointment in the basement of his new precinct. While Leon Harper was taking his oath in the sunlit chambers of City Hall, Dave Harlan was sitting in the windowless, fluorescent-lit purgatory of Internal Affairs Interview Room B. Harlan looked like a man who had aged years in a matter of hours. He was no longer wearing his uniform. Sergeant Miller had provided him with a cheap, ill-fitting gray sweatsuit from the lockup reserves after confiscating his mud-stained clothes as evidence. Harlan's eyes were bloodshot, his hands trembling as he clutched a lukewarm cup of bitter precinct coffee. The door handle clicked. Harlan looked up eagerly, expecting to see the head of the police union. Harlan had used his one phone call to beg the union rep to come down and fix this. The door swung open, but it wasn't the union rep who walked in. It was Chief Leon Harper. Behind him was Internal Affairs lead Detective Rosa Gutierrez, carrying a thick manila folder, and Officer Chris Lopez, the rookie who had witnessed the entire debacle, looking pale but resolute. Leon didn't sit down. He stood on the opposite side of the steel table, looking down at the broken man who just hours prior had called him boy and threatened to drag him out of his car. "Mr. Harlan," Leon said, his voice flat, professional, and terrifyingly calm. Harlan scrambled to his feet, knocking over his coffee cup in the process. The brown liquid spilled across the metal table, dripping onto his sweatpants. He didn't notice. "Chief Harper, sir, please, I've been trying to reach the union." The union rep watched the body camera footage a short while ago. Leon interrupted, his dark eyes boring into Harlan's soul. "Stundu ATM, he formally notified my office that the union will not be representing you in this matter. Your actions were so egregiously outside the scope of departmental policy and the law that they have abandoned you." Harlan's knees gave out. He collapsed back into his hard plastic chair, the last pillar of his defense crumbling into dust. They can't do that. I paid my dues for years." "You paid your dues," Leon agreed quietly. "And now you're paying your debts." Leon gestured to Detective Gutierrez, who opened the thick manila folder and placed a stack of documents on the wet table. "We pulled your file earlier," Leon said, tapping the stack of papers. 17 excessive force complaints, 12 complaints of racial profiling, 4 unlawful search and seizure lawsuits that the city quietly settled out of court to make them go away. You have cost the taxpayers of Riverton over $2 million in civil settlements over your career. And yet Captain Foster kept you on the street. Harlan stared at the files, his chest heaving as a panic attack began to set in. It was a different time. The streets are rough, Chief. You know how it is. I know exactly how it is. Leon snapped, his voice finally cracking like a whip, silencing Harlan instantly. I spent years kicking down doors in the worst gang territories on the East Coast. I fought cartels. I fought human traffickers. And I never once had to strip a man of his dignity or violate the Constitution to do it. You didn't do this because the streets are rough, Harlan. You did it because you are a coward who likes to bully people you think can't fight back. Leon pulled a single sheet of paper from his own breast pocket and laid it precisely in front of Harlan. This is your formal notice of termination, effective immediately. You are stripped of your pension under the moral turpitude clause of your contract. My pension? Harlan gasped, tears finally spilling over his eyelids, cutting tracks through the grease and sweat on his face. Chief, please, my wife, my mortgage. I'll resign. Just let me resign. I'll surrender my certification. Please don't take the pension. I am not taking it. You forfeited it the moment you decided your badge made you a king, Leon replied coldly. But unemployment is the least of your concerns today. Leon looked at Officer Lopez. Officer Lopez, did you bring the drive? Yes, Chief, Lopez said, stepping forward and placing a small encrypted USB drive on the table. He looked at Harlan, his former mentor, with a mixture of pity and disgust. The dashcam footage and my body cam footage from the incident, completely unedited. Thank you, officer, Leon said. He turned back to Harlan. At this exact moment, my office is transmitting this footage to District Attorney Paul Kensington, along with a formal request for an indictment. Harlan shook his head frantically. Indictment? For what? It was a bad stop. It's an administrative violation, maybe a misdemeanor. You are gravely mistaken, Leon said, leaning in so his face was only inches from Harlan's. You detained me under false pretenses. You fabricated probable cause. You executed an unlawful search. Therefore, I am not pursuing local administrative charges. I have contacted the regional field office of the FBI. You are being charged federally under Title 18, United States Code, Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. Because you were armed during the commission of this felony, it carries a potential sentence of up to 10 years in federal prison. The color drained from Harlan's face entirely. He looked like a corpse. Federal prison. Cops didn't survive in federal prison. And there is one final piece of business, Leon added, his voice dropping to a low, relentless rumble. District Attorney Kensington has agreed to open a full audit of every single arrest you have made over the years. Every piece of evidence you found, every confession you coerced, every phantom smell of marijuana you used to lock a young man in a cage. We are going to unravel your entire life's work, Harlan. The innocent people you framed are going to go free, and the city will know exactly what you are. Harlan opened his mouth to speak, to beg, to rationalize, but no sound came out. He simply put his head down on the cold metal table and began to sob. It was the ugly, broken sound of a man who had finally met a wall he couldn't bully his way through. Leon watched him cry for a moment. He felt no pity. He felt no triumph. He only felt the cold, necessary satisfaction of a surgeon cutting out a rot that had threatened to kill the patient. Detective Gutierrez, Leon said, turning his back on the weeping man. Process him. Take his mugshot, roll his fingerprints, and put him in a holding cell with the general population until the federal marshals arrive to take custody. Yes, Chief, Gutierrez replied, her voice ringing with a newfound respect. Leon Harper walked out of the interview room, the heavy steel door slamming shut behind him with a resonant final clang. He walked down the fluorescent hallway of the basement, his polished shoes echoing sharply against the linoleum. The real work of rebuilding the Riverton Police Department was just beginning, but as he stepped into the elevator to go to his new office, Leon knew one thing for certain. The foundation was finally clean. The story of Dave Harlan's rapid and absolute downfall serves as a stark reminder that true power does not lie in a badge, a gun, or the ability to instill fear. It lies in the unwavering application of the law, applied equally to those who enforce it. The hard karma that struck Harlan wasn't a twist of fate, but the inevitable collision between unchecked systemic arrogance and a man who possessed both the authority and the moral fortitude to dismantle it. In the months that followed, over 40 of Harlan's past convictions were overturned, and he began serving a substantial sentence in a federal penitentiary. Under Chief Leon Harper, Riverton didn't just see a change in leadership, it witnessed a paradigm shift. The department was transformed from an occupying force into a true public service, proving that darkness cannot survive when the people at the top refuse to look away from the light. The flashing blue and white lights in the rearview mirror that once meant nothing more than a minor inconvenience became, on that muggy summer night along Route 35, the moment everything changed for a man who had built his entire career on unchecked prejudice and abuse of power. Officer Dave Harlan thought he had found another easy target. A black man in a sleek black Porsche Cayenne cruising through a wealthy suburban stretch outside Riverton. He expected fear, submission, and the sweet rush of dominance. What he never imagined was that the calm, broad-shouldered driver he pulled over was Leon Harper, the incoming chief of police, the very man hired to clean up a department rotten with corruption and racial profiling. As Harlan's aggression unfolded, fabricated reasons for the stop, invasive searches, racial slurs, and the humiliating destruction of personal belongings, the scene slowly revealed its devastating truth. The gold shield gleaming inside that mahogany box didn't just expose one officer's bigotry. It shattered the illusion that power could ever be wielded without consequence. In a single night, decades of arrogance crumbled under the weight of true authority applied with justice, not cruelty. Watching Harlan's swagger evaporate into trembling terror, his pension stripped, his freedom threatened, and his life's work unraveled, leaves a raw ache in the chest. A painful but necessary reminder of how fragile false power truly is. This story delivers one of life's most profound lessons. Real strength isn't found in badges, guns, or the ability to intimidate the vulnerable. It lives in integrity, accountability, and the courage to treat every human being with the dignity they deserve, regardless of skin color, car, or status. When we abuse power, we don't just harm others. We plant the seeds of our own destruction. But when we choose justice, even in darkness, we build something lasting and honorable. If this powerful tale moved you, touched something deep inside, or reminded you why standing up for what's right matters, drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Which part hit you the hardest? Have you ever witnessed or experienced something similar? Let's talk about it. And if you want more inspiring, thought-provoking stories like this, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join our community. Your support keeps these meaningful messages alive. Thank you for watching. Stay strong, stay just, and remember, karma always finds its way.